Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of my Dungeon Boss Tactical Series. Today we are going to be taking a look at a unique topic as far as upgrading and attaching runes onto the Goblin team. So, runing out the Goblin team is a little bit different than you would with some of your other power teams because there's some very specific mechanics with the Goblins. So, everybody should know at this point that the main component of Goblins is usually critical because of King Bramble. Let's just get right into the heroes here. King Bramble. That is not him, that is Shadowblade. Of course, he's going to be way down at the bottom of my list where I have to scroll for pages. Custom sort would be really nice here, but I digress. Alright, so right here. Critical Goblin order is why we want critical. So whenever a Goblin ally scores a crit, they attack again. That's the whole, pretty much the bread and butter of the entire Goblin team, is you need to be able to crit. But the thing with doing that is a lot of people will take their Goblin team and their goal is to get this crit chance up to 50%, which you want to have 50% crit, obviously, but you have to consider how that's actually going to happen. So the thing with Cruel King Bramble, which you have to realize, is this other stat here, good to be the king. Goblin allies get 20% buff to attack and crit. So that 20% buff to crit is including the 50% cap. So what that means is you cannot, if you max somebody out to 50% crit and they get this 20% buff from Bramble, that's not going to send it up to 70% when you're running the dungeon. I guarantee you that's not the case. I've run enough dungeons to be able to tell if my heroes were running a 70% attack and crit versus a 50%, because it's there's a very big difference there in my opinion. So when you rune out your goblins, you have to determine what's going to be your stopping point. So really, your goal is going to be for that 30% rather than 50%. Because if you rune them out to 30%, then when you run the dungeon with Bramble, you're going to get that extra 20. That's going to get you to your 50%. So a lot of people will accidentally or even just unknowingly equip their goblins with as many precision runes as they can, get that to 50%, and end up wasting a ton of critical percent. And then their goblin team is ultimately underpowered both in attack and in defense. So let's actually start with Bramble here. So when we run a goblin team, you pretty much have to understand what are you ruining your goblin team for? What's the purpose of running your goblins? So for me, I use goblins to farm the Boss Island totems. So I run goblins in Savage Grove, I run them in Permafrost Ice Cave, and I also run them in Babel Mountain when I'm auto running. So that's 3 different stages where I'm running goblins, and being that those are boss mode type stages, I need survivability, which is a mainstay when you're running auto teams. So when I run these, I might be more inclined to go with defense and health pool versus attack. And that's really not going to pertain to the entire team, but it's definitely a starting point in terms of doing your runes. So looking at Bramble here, if we go back to the profile, I don't have any runes on him at all. We go to his stats, he's got 47% crit. Pouring precision runes on him is going to be an absolute waste. In my opinion, do we need to rune him out heavily towards defense and health? He's not really a true tank, in my opinion. I don't see a lot of people actually running slow play dungeons and actually taunting with Bramble. If you're running a Goblin team and you have all 4 of them, most people are just running through and just going on a crit frenzy to determine where they actually, want to get with him. And in my opinion, taunting isn't really on the menu anywhere. So I might add some defense, I might add some health, but ultimately, believe it or not, Bramble is going to be one of your main attackers. The reason being is when you start doing manual run dungeons and you start using Overlord Blitz, this one here, if he's got high attack, attacks on one plus 2 other ones. So he does 3 total attacks. If he crits on all 3, he hits 6 times. That actually whips out a ton of damage. So if you have that shortly after doing Goblin Dance Party, Bramble can be a major attacker for you. So understanding how you want to rune your goblins is going to be important before you actually start ruining them. So my preference is to take a look at the team composition. What does each one actually bring to the table? Bramble, he's there mostly for that support role to give the critical goblin odor and to give the boost to critical. If you don't have Bramble, your goblin team is just flat out incomplete. You can ruin the other guys to 50%, but without Bramble, they're not the same. It's a totally incomplete team. So when we talk about who does what, let's start at the top then. Nub Nub is used for healing. So Nub Nub's greatest thing with him is right here. So he heals, and right there, heal team on crit. So we need Nub Nub to be hitting critical. So we need to get his actual crit as high as possible. So when we go into dungeons, we want him to be at 50%. So after that, is he attacker? Not really. So we don't really care how much damage he does. We just want him to crit often and keep on healing the team. So for ruining him up, we're actually going to go with health and defense so that he doesn't die. And the fact that he's epic now actually gave us defense and max health as buffs, which is really nice because that does allow you the flexibility to pour some extra runes into attack if you want. But honestly, I would keep stacking defense and health in my opinion. Next up is going to be Squinch. Squinch is also epic, but his last trait is the attack. But he's got health, defense, and attack, which as far as goblins go, those are the 3 main ones you want, because we're going to get the critical through just runes and stuff. But in this case here, Squinch is the only one that should almost never waver as far as how you ruin him. In my opinion, Squinch is always, 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 capital always, a damage dealer. So you can try to put defense and health on him, but I just don't feel like it's that important. Partially because he's already armored, so he takes less damage from a lot of heroes in the game. The reason that I want you to put attack on him is because of his first ability, which is playing with fire. If you do playing with fire and you have Goblin Dance Party, he is going to likely crit on a big dungeon where there's 5 guys in there. He'll likely crit on all 5 of those, and then he's going to do 5 additional attacks because of the critical goblin order. So having him dish out the absolute most possible damage is your main goal with Squinch here. And then that leaves us with Zurk. Zurk is kind of an in-between, and if there's ever flexibility in terms of how you want to rune a goblin, Zurk is going to be the big question mark. Zurk has one job as far as the goblin team is concerned, and that is right here. Once per round on a crit, gives them haste and +1 energy. The energy is not really a big deal, but that haste gives everybody an extra turn, which is huge. So you want this to happen every single round, basically. So Zurk's only real job is to crit. So at the very least, if you're struggling for runes, get Zurk to the 30% so that he can guarantee to have the 50. You have to have that. After that, do you want to go with attack or defense? Since he's not epic yet, you kind of have to choose one or balance between the two. Personally, I would probably rune Zurk towards the end, because he doesn't need as good of runes. As long as I can get him up to the necessary critical percent, I don't really care what else he has on there, unless you're worried about him dying. So for me, when I run Savage Grove, for example, there's these green stone fists in there that do an armor break attack that can kill almost anybody. Zurk is especially susceptible to that because he's not armored and he's overall fairly weak. So for me, I might be more inclined to dish out a little bit more health and defense on Zurk versus attack. I already have both Bramble and Squinch for attacking. Zurk is there to crit and to give the team haste. Nub Nub is in there to crit and heal the team. So we basically have 2 damage dealers and 2 support heroes. So let's go and see what it actually takes us to rune these people up. Which one is the most important? I'm going to start with actually Nub Nub. So Nub Nub is our healer. We want him to have survivability. So we need health, we need defense, but we also need to get to that critical threshold. So in order to address critical, I'm going to pull up a secondary graphic here and show you what is going to be our threshold. Because if we look at him right now, without any runes, he has a skill of 1700 and a crit chance of 27%. So I'm going to pull up my graphic here with crit chances. And what this is based off of is I took every single hero that I had in the game and I looked at what their total skill is and what their crit chance is, excluding runes and epics. And so basically it created this nice little graph here. I know it's a little bit fuzzy in some spots. There's too many data points in some of the ones that it covered up the actual values. But we can see here that with 1700 skill, that puts us right around 27% crit chance. So our goal is to get these goblins up to 30%, which means that we need to get our skill up to about 2,000 or between 2,000 and 2,100 to actually get to that 30%. So by knowing this ahead of time, that actually helps us quite a bit in terms of which runes we're actually going to pick. Rather than just picking runes out of your bank and saying, okay, let's throw this one on here, see what our crit actually gets up to. We can actually think things through before actually equipping so that we're not getting hit with a bunch of unequipped costs. And then ultimately, that'll help you choose which runes you actually want to pick too, because remember, not all rune colors are the same. So for example, the blue and yellow runes have more of the crit based stats than they do for like the destruction runes or the battle or power runes. So if we can get most of our skill out of those 2 rune colors, then we can use our other ones for those high powered defense or high powered attack runes. So I know that I need to get my skill up to, let's just say ballpark, we're going to say 2,100. Right now that is 350 away. That's actually very reasonable. So we will go into the runes and we're going to find a blue rune first and see if we can get closer to 400 skill. So improved precision, we have 121. So that gets us partially the way there. We're probably going to be looking for graders and maybe even superiors, but obviously you have to work with whatever runes you have. But just knowing that end point is obviously a good start. Now, some people have asked, well, why don't I just go for these straight up crit chance? And in general, the crit chance is a good way to go to, but you have to be aware of what you're getting when you choose just the crit chance. So let's take a quick sidebar here. Skill, how often the hero can crit, and the quality of non-attack skills like healing. This is especially true for Nub Nub because you want to have as high of skill as possible to get those crits rather than just the percent crit chance, because if you just have the percent crit chance, you're not getting the benefit of having a high skill. So for some of the other ones, like the attack ones, like Bramble and Squinch, your skill doesn't necessarily matter as much as your overall crit chance does. But for Nub Nub, I want to get his skill as high as physically possible because it is going to impact his healing. The same might be true for other healers in the game, like Yasmin and such. Try to get that skill as high as possible versus just the crit chance. So if I looked at that, then we would want to look to see what can I find as far as best possible skill. And so focus should have some skill on it. This is 143, and then it's got dodge chance and health. So here's another one. It's got 200 total skill. So in terms of blue runes, I probably don't have a ton of them that are going to get the necessary skill that I want. I need to get 400 total. before I commit to any of these runes. And like I said, you might want to just take a piece of paper and jot these things down to see where you're at so you don't get hit with the costs. So this greater focus has skill of 367. That's actually pretty good. So 360 out of the 400 some that I needed, plus an extra 189 at the bottom, plus 4% on the crit chance. And things are actually starting to look pretty good. So let's go ahead and equip this one and look at his stats. Crit chance 37%, courtesy of that extra skill and the focus rune. So now he's at the 30%. I can throw whatever I want on him at this point here. So now I have free reign to do anything else as far as attack, defense, health, even if you want to throw some dodge in there or some resist. I don't advise resist, but we can pretty much do whatever we like now. So because the goblins are heavy on critical, we don't want to just go pouring all these other runes on the other goblins without analyzing first. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at Squinch next, because Squinch needs skill as well. I mean, he doesn't need skill, but he does need crit chance. So we'll see what else we can do as far as these yellow ones here. We have some precision here, bunch of crit chance. So that's going to increase when I max this one out to probably 7% on the top and maybe like 4 or 5% on the bottom. So that's going to be overall a pretty high crit chance. I'm looking to see if there's anything else that can improve my skill that might be worth adding on here. And it's not looking like that's going to happen. So this precision rune is probably going to be a good way to go. Remember, I don't need the skill as much as Nub Nub needs it. So let's go ahead and actually upgrade this one. The reduced damage from light would actually be pretty helpful for when you run Babel Mountain. So crit chance 8, crit chance 3.8, so we get 12 total percent here. So I'm going to go ahead and add that one. Equip, stats. He is now at an even 30%. So just by equipping other junk on him, attack, health, defense, it doesn't really matter. It might bump the crit up just a little bit further, but ultimately we're going to work on his other stats now. So we got those two covered. And now with Squinch, Squinch is going to be easier to rune because we don't really care so much about skill. So with Squinch, and the other big difference with Squinch is he is red instead of green. So he has a slightly different loadout than the other guys. And so now, if I can find him, I suppose he's going to be up at my epic ones. Squinch's starting point is 21%. So we need to get another 30% out of him. His loadout is red, red, green, yellow, purple. So since none of the other goblins can even use fire runes, it makes sense that we should focus on those two first, because we want to maximize our efforts here. Since none of the other goblins can use them, the best ones we have here, we want to put on him. So looking at our pool, we have improved focus, greater focus. We have skill, crit, and dodge. That one would be pretty decent. Skill, health, and defense, that would probably be pretty good as well. 245. This one here will get well over that. Let's take a quick look at his skill, which is 1300. In order to get him to 30%, we need that 2100. We're obviously not going to find 800 skill just laying around in some of these runes, and honestly, that's going to be kind of a waste to try and get to that. But we can at least see where it's going to take us. So I'm going to take some of these higher powered runes, basically just take the best ones I got. This one is skill, health, and defense. Really good rune, to be honest, because it's a wide variety, and it does have skill, so it is going to raise his crit chance. How much is it going to raise? It's 315, so if I had to guess, that is going to raise it by about 2%. So this was 21%. I'm expecting to see 23 or 24 after equipping this one. And we are at 25, actually better than what I thought. Okay, so now crit chance of 25%. We only need to get 5% more out of him, which is actually going to be pretty easy to do. So let's pick our other red one. We have more focus runes here. Skill, skill, health. That's going to put us over the edge there. None of the other guys can even use fire runes, so I'm just going to go ahead and upgrade this one. The little bit of health will be nice for him, and then I can focus all those other runes on other things. So maybe it would have made more sense to try and get that extra little bit of crit out of this light rune. But ultimately what I might do is I might ultimately put one of these like Aegis runes on him just so he has some survivability, just to make him last a little bit longer versus just all out attack. So we got him now 31% with the 20 from Bramble. He's going to be over 50. He's going to be ready to go. And then that really only leaves us with Cruel King Bramble. He was already at 47%. And to be honest here, you could probably put almost any of your best runes on him, and that's going to carry him up over that 50%, and you're going to be all good to go. Because he already gets the passive himself. If you look at his crit chance, he already gets the 20% bonus, and he's already got a good amount of skill right from the start. So we could probably put almost anything we want on here. He would probably be one that I would rune towards the end after you've allocated your skill and crit chance to the other guys. But we saw just with the runes that I had, we only had to equip 3 or 4 runes to get to the necessary percents that we want. And now we have free reign with all these guys to put the best of the best of whatever we have left, I guess. So in my case, I'm going to try and rune these guys more towards survivability and try and get extra attack on Bramble and on Squinch. And then that should work pretty well for my auto runs. And then we're ultimately not wasting a ton of crit chance. So compared to other heroes, you want to be very cautious about that crit chance. So if you're using someone like Braum or Zom and you want them to have high crit, they don't get this extra bonus in dungeons. So you do have to pour a lot more skill and crit chance runes onto those guys. Whereas with the goblins, you can get away with other mediocre runes as far as skill and crit, and then ultimately pour better runes in health, attack, and defense. So if you have any other questions in terms of how best to rune these guys up, or if you're missing a particular person on the Goblin team, remember, if you don't have Bramble, you pretty much don't have a Goblin team. It's going to be much, much more difficult to run Goblin teams without Bramble because of the 2 main traits here, this extra crit chance and the Goblin Odor. But if you have any questions on best ways to rune some of the other guys or some possible alternatives, I would love to hear some feedback. Feel free to leave that information in the comments. Otherwise, if you have questions regarding your team, feel free to send private messages and such like that. Otherwise, hopefully this was informative for you. If you found it helpful, feel free to leave a helpful comment. Otherwise, stick around and we'll have more videos for you shortly. Thanks.